In the heart of the city that never slept, beneath the ceaseless hum of life, lay a coffee shop that seemed to exist outside of time. It was a small, dimly lit place, tucked between towering skyscrapers and bustling streets, its presence almost an afterthought. The sign above the door read simply, "Existence." Inside, the air was thick with the aroma of brewing coffee and the quiet murmur of subdued conversations. The patrons were a mix of the city's lost and found, each seeking solace in the anonymity of the place. Among them sat Max, a man in his early 30s, whose eyes bore the weight of countless sleepless nights and an unspoken resignation to the mundanity of existence. Max had always been a thinker, a seeker of truths in a world that seemed devoid of them. His childhood was spent in books and solitude, pondering the mysteries of the universe. As he grew older, he pursued philosophy with a fervour, hoping to find answers to the questions that plagued his mind. But the more he learned, the less he believed. The grand narratives of meaning and purpose crumbled under the weight of scrutiny, leaving him adrift in a sea of nihilism. He often found himself at existence, drawn to its ironic name and the quietude it offered. It was there that he met Evelyn, a barista with a perpetually faraway look in her eyes. She moved with a grace that seemed incongruent with the dreary confines of the coffee shop, her presence a fleeting beacon of light in Max's otherwise dark world. One evening, as the city outside buzzed with its usual frenetic energy, Max sat hunched over a worn copy of Nietzsche's "Thus Spoke Zarathustra." The words felt like an echo of his own thoughts, a confirmation of the futility he saw in the world. Evelyn approached his table, her steps barely making a sound on the wooden floor. "Refill?" she asked, her voice soft yet piercing. Max looked up, momentarily caught off guard by the intensity of her gaze. "Sure," he replied, pushing his cup toward her. Evelyn poured the coffee slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "What are you reading?" "Nietzsche," Max replied, his tone devoid of enthusiasm. "Trying to find some sense in all of this." Evelyn smiled, a wistful expression that hinted at her own familiarity with the search for meaning. "And have you found any?" Max sighed, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. "No, just more questions, more emptiness." Evelyn nodded as if she understood all too well. She set the coffee pot down and took a seat across from him. "Do you mind if I join you for a moment?" "Not at all," Max said, surprised by his own eagerness for her company. They sat in silence for a while, the noise of the coffee shop fading into the background. Evelyn's presence was a strange comfort, a reminder that even in his isolation, he was not entirely alone. "Do you ever feel like nothing matters?" Max asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn tilted her head, considering his question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I've also found that in the grand scheme of things, maybe it's okay if nothing matters. Maybe the absence of inherent meaning gives us the freedom to create our own." Max frowned, the idea both intriguing and unsettling. "Create our own meaning? How?" Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his heart race. "By finding joy in the small things. By connecting with others, even if just for a moment. By embracing the absurdity of it all and choosing to live despite it." Max thought about her words long after she returned to her duties behind the counter. The idea of embracing absurdity, of finding meaning in the meaningless, was a foreign concept to him. But as the days turned into weeks, he found himself returning to existence more often, drawn not just by the coffee, but by the conversations with Evelyn. One rainy evening, As the city was shrouded in a melancholic mist, Max and Evelyn sat together once more. This time, it was Max who initiated the conversation. "Do you really believe we can create our own meaning?" he asked, his voice tinged with skepticism, but also a glimmer of hope. Evelyn smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. "I do. I think it's all we can do. Life may be inherently meaningless, but that doesn't mean we can't find beauty and purpose in the fleeting moments we have." Max looked around the coffee shop, at the faces of strangers who each carried their own burdens and dreams. For the first time in a long while, he felt a faint stirring of something other than despair. It wasn't quite hope, but it was close. As the weeks turned into months, Max and Evelyn's conversations deepened. They talked about philosophy, art, and the nature of existence. They shared their fears and dreams, their disappointments and hopes. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Max began to see the world through a different lens. He still wrestled with nihilism, still questioned the purpose of it all, but he also began to find joy in the simple act of living. He took long walks through the city, savouring the sights and sounds. He reconnected with old friends, sharing laughter and stories. And he cherished his time with Evelyn, whose presence had become a beacon of light in his once dark world. One evening, as they sat together in existence, Max turned to Evelyn and said, "Thank you." Evelyn looked at him, puzzled. "For what?" "For helping me see that even in a world without inherent meaning, there's still beauty to be found. For showing me that we can create our own purpose, even if it's just for a moment." Evelyn smiled, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of joy and understanding. "I'm glad I could help, but remember, it's not about finding a grand purpose. It's about embracing the journey, the moments that make up our lives." Max nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. For the first time in his life, he felt a semblance of acceptance. He still didn't have all the answers, and maybe he never would. But he was learning to live with the uncertainty, to find meaning in the meaningless. As the city outside continued its ceaseless hum, Max and Evelyn sat together in the quiet cocoon of existence, sharing a moment of connection in a world that often seemed devoid of it. And in that moment, Max realized that perhaps, just perhaps, there was something to be said for the beauty of the absurd.